Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you all for joining us today on this. If you're in Toronto, I know we have people from all over the world here with us, but if you're based in Toronto, as some of us are, it's a beautiful day here and the temperatures are beautiful. So I appreciate everybody joining us. Despite that, we've had a very long winter. Let's hope this is a sign of spring. So my name, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Avi Ben Lolo. I'm the chairman and founder of the Abraham Global Peace Initiative, a new charitable organization here in Canada, where we're working every single day to advance peace, freedom, democracy, obviously combating anti-Semitism, Holocaust distortion, and really working on an international platform to advance those ideals. So we appreciate everybody's attendance here today, everybody's involvement and participation. Thankfully, the organization is doing remarkably well. We're gaining lots of momentum, and our event, our first launch gala event, is nearly sold out for May 26th. So if you haven't bought your tickets, please do so. We're really thrilled that many corporate partners have come along with us. Including the 5 national Canadian banks, law firms, accounting firms, etc. So really, it's a thrill for us as we get this organization going and successfully so. In the next few weeks, you're going to see more from us with respect to international travel and what we're doing international. And I won't tell you too much about that until you see it, because these days with travel, who knows what happens? It's been a horror show, particularly now with what's happening in Europe. So we've had to make some alterations, and so the organization continues to perform internationally and as well locally. Obviously, we've been writing and publishing and putting out a lot of materials externally with respect to the situation in Ukraine. We just published an article on that in both the Times of Israel and the National Post. Obviously, the Amnesty International is another big quagmire, and Amnesty is probably biting their lips right now because they realize what a faux pas they've done for themselves and the credibility that they've lost for their organization. Given the fact that Israel is obviously an international player, with Bennett having just visited Putin and the German chancellor, and with respect as well, if you've seen and we've had no time to write about this, which is unfortunate, but Israel just came out in something like 23rd place on the international index. For The Economist, it was either 23rd or 26th. I'm trying to recollect that, but with respect to democracy internationally, which is just exceptional for Israel. And so that quashes, of course, the Amnesty claim that Israel is an apartheid state. It's funny enough, but it's real, and unfortunately, we have to continue combating it. And of course, sadly enough, in the Greater Toronto area, for those of you who aren't aware, we've been reeling from several weeks of just profound anti-Semitism in our schools at the Toronto District School Board, as well as York Region. Last night, we put out another press release on that issue. Both Neil Orlowski, who is our Director of Education, is here with us, and myself. We've been, talking to the boards and working with the schools and trying to mitigate this issue. It's very profound with respect to the, to children doing Heil Hitler salutes against Jewish teachers, and graffiti on schools. We even now registered one in York Region. We thought it was only in Toronto, but things are growing and increasing. And unfortunately, some of this, it's becoming normalized and popularized. And so children are more emboldened and emulating what it is that they see. And I think, and I've written about this a little bit, and I won't, and we're going to get to our presentation in 3 seconds, But I really do believe that a lot of what we're seeing, it's the echoes of the Holocaust, of Nazism, that the rhetoric on Nazism and is massive now, of course, with what's happening between Russia and Ukraine. And so children who are not understanding that are utilizing the imagery online as well, because it's just so pervasive. And so, we are also, of course, big advocates institutionally about the Abraham the Abraham Peace Accord, so to speak, and really, here to support them. From Canada, we believe that Canadians can play a role, that we can be supportive. It has not registered in Canada as it should. And so we're here to ratchet up the support, because we think that if you look at the world today, where is the optimism? The optimism is with the Abraham Accords. And so in a moment, you're going to be introduced to a good friend of mine, Fleur Hassan-Nahoum, who is the Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem, and she will be speaking to us from Dubai, and she'll be introduced momentarily. Before I do that, I'd like to as well welcome both Genevieve Corman and Candace Solomon, who are co-chairs for our Global Women's Initiative, which is another aspect of the organization that we recently launched. Of course, we know that supporting women's rights and championing that is really a critical aspect. And if we want to see social change, and I've always believed that, if you want to see social change in the Middle East and around the world, it's women's rights, and that's where it is. If you want to see democracy take hold, and if you look at how democracy in the West in general has taken hold, it's always been through women's rights. And if you look at the 18th century writings of people like Mary Wollstonecraft and so many others, it's been about women's rights. And so, we believe as an institution that this is a critical area that we need to focus on, work on, and continuously develop. And that's why we're celebrating, even though it's on Tuesday, today was the best day to do this, International Women's Day, through our initiative with both Genevieve and Candace. And I am going to now stop and hand the floor over to them to introduce our keynote speaker. Please go ahead.
Thanks so much, Avi. Good morning, everyone. My name is Genevieve Corman, and I am co-chair of AGPI's Women's Global Initiative with Candace Solomon. Candace and I would like to welcome you all and thank you for joining us today. We are beyond honored to introduce our speaker, Fleur Hassan-Nahoum, who serves as Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem. Fleur has an inspiring life story. She was born in London and grew up in Gibraltar. She moved back to London to study law at King's College London University and qualified as a barrister in 1997. She practiced law in London before immigrating to Israel in 2001. In Israel, Fleur worked at the Joint Distribution Committee, a leading global Jewish humanitarian organization, where she focused on resource development for Europe. Later, she became the executive director of Tikva, a nonprofit organization saving abandoned and abused Jewish children from the former Soviet Union. Fleur also set up her own communications and consulting business, Message Experts, to assist large corporations and nonprofit organizations with effective communication strategies.
In 2016, Fleur became a city councillor in Jerusalem, and in 2017, the leader of the opposition. She was re-elected in 2018 and was appointed deputy mayor. She heads up foreign relations, economic development, and tourism within the city of Jerusalem. Fleur is a champion of the Abraham Accords and co-founded the UAE-Israel Business Council, an association of Emirati and Israeli business and government leaders fostering bilateral trade, innovation, and cooperation. This council was established in 2020 following the Abraham Accords peace treaty between Israel, the UAE, and Bahrain. Fleur is currently the only British-born politician in Israel. She is involved in the advancement of British, of women's rights and marginalized population groups in the city. She is focused on economic development and the fight for a pluralistic Jerusalem. She is also a firm believer that women should be part of local government. Fleur, we are truly grateful to have you here today in celebration of International Women's Day, which is coming up, as Avi mentioned, on Tuesday, March the 8th. You are an inspiration to all of us. On behalf of the Abraham Global Peace Initiative, we welcome you and thank you for your participation in today's event. We appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us on a Sunday, and we are excited to hear your perspective on world relations currently affecting Israel. The virtual podium is yours.
Thank you so much, Candice, and thank you so much, Genevieve. And of course, Avi Ben Lolo, my friend, for inviting me into this wonderful evening to celebrate women's achievements, but also really grateful for the work, Avi, that you've been doing to advance peace and to advance Israel's status in the world. So I have to tell you where I am. I'm currently in Dubai at the Dubai Expo, and this is really interesting because I've just come from an event that was put together by JNF Canada and JNF Israel, the Climate Solutions Prize that was launched by JNF Canada. And so I've just been hanging out with the Canadian ambassador to the UAE, who's a wonderful Jewish woman called Marcy Grossman, who's a good friend of mine. And so I'm imbued this evening with women and Canada and the Abraham Accords, of course, because I'm here in Dubai. So it's really wonderful to be with all of you. And I think that people don't really understand the incredible impact of the Abraham Accords, because I believe that in North America, Canada, not enough fuss has been made about how this has completely changed everything. Everything has been changed by the Abraham Accords in the sense that there's been a paradigm shift. We can no longer talk about the Arab-Israeli conflict. There's no Arab-Israeli conflict anymore. Israel is in conflict with Palestinian groups and the Palestinian leadership. Israel is in conflict because they're in conflict with us, with the Iranians. But the Middle Eastern lines have been redrawn from what it was to now the countries that want peace and prosperity and modernity and look into the future. And on the other side, countries of radicalism and destruction. And those are the new lines of the Middle East, not along religious lines between Muslims and Jews. And this is actually so significant. And I'm just very grateful that I was able to, and I'm still able to take a leading part in the people-to-people initiatives that are keeping these accords warm and sustainable. And what I want to say is that women and women leading these Abraham Accords is actually crucial. One of the things that wasn't mentioned in my bio, is probably my fault, is that I'm also the co-founder of the Gulf Israel Women's Forum. And that came from the belief that if we want a sustainable, warm peace, people-to-people peace that we didn't have with Egypt and we never had with Jordan, this is something women have to lead, because women create very strong bonds much quicker. We just do. You know, I mean, we could argue with people that say it's nurture, not nature, whatever it is. Women have our own language. And our language is much more consensus building focus. That's just how we are hardwired. And that is why it's so crucial for women to take the leading role in keeping this peace sustainable and warm, and, you know, and to keep this paradigm shift going. So I'll talk a little bit about what's going on in terms of what we've managed to achieve in the Abraham Accords. I'll talk a little bit about the work that we're doing with women in Jerusalem, and then I'll be much happier for this to be a conversation and answer your specific questions, which is always more fun. So at the moment, the UAE-Israel Business Council, which Candice, you mentioned, we set it up unofficially before the Abraham Accords started because we felt there was something going on. There was under the radar normalization. Something was cooking, and I understood this from the American embassy in Jerusalem. Well, I have to remember that the Americans made a huge, momentous leap and moved their embassy to Israel's eternal capital, Jerusalem. And as soon as the embassy was in Jerusalem, we started seeing a lot of movement, and something was heating up with the Gulf. And so my longtime friend, Dorian Barak, and Dorian is an American Israeli who's been doing business in the Gulf for many, many years. He also understood from the business perspective that something was cooking, that there was a kind of under the radar normalization. We understood that 200 to 300 Israeli businesses were already working in the UAE through third party countries. We understood that many of the technology in the UAE, especially security technology, was coming from Israel, again, through third parties. And so we decided to create the UAE-Israel Business Council. And as soon as the Abraham Accords were announced, which took us all by surprise, we didn't realize it was going to happen so soon. We knew it was going to happen, but I thought it was going to take a few years. So it came as a total surprise. Within a week, we created the first platform, the first virtual platform for UAE businesses and Emirati and Israeli businesses to start talking. People were so keen. And so we created the first platform. Once we created it, people went like whoosh, they just got together. We started doing events, virtual events, because this was in the middle of COVID, of course. So we started putting together lots of different events, networking, events with content, events with how to do business in the UAE for Israelis. And I think the thing that I'm most proud about, two things, I guess. One is that I got here. I was the first Israeli politician to actually get on a plane and get over here. And that was end of September. But I think my proudest moment is the fact that the first ever physical event between Emiratis and Israelis post the Abraham Accords signing was my women's event. So women actually led the way right from the very beginning. We were the first ever real event, physical event between Emiratis and Israelis after the signature of the Abraham Accords. And so, we start as we mean to go on. And this organization, my Gulf Israel Women's Group, has grown to 150 leaders from all the signatory countries, which are, of course, the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan. Sudan, have been caught up in internal conflict. But what's most interesting about the Gulf Israel Women's Forum is that we have women represented from countries that haven't even made peace with Israel. So we have Saudi women in my forum, and we have countries that already made peace with Israel, but had a cold peace with Israel. So we have Egyptian women in the Gulf Israel Women's Forum who come to me and say, well, why didn't we have this when Israel and Egypt made peace? Why was this peace never trickled down? And I think this is why it's so interesting. And the Abraham Accords have indeed been a paradigm shift, because it's created a new model for peace. It's not the old model of Egypt and Jordan, which is we're signing peace accords from the bottom, from the top down. The leaders have signed peace, but it never really trickled down to people. There were no real people-to-people initiatives. I mean, there's many reasons why not. Remember that we had bloodshed with these countries. These countries, we had direct wars with them. Not so with the UAE, not so with Morocco, not so with Bahrain, of course. But we did have direct conflict with Egypt and Jordan. But also, we have to look at the peace in the days that it was signed. We talk about decades ago with no Zoom and no WhatsApp, a completely different era. And so we can't judge those peace deals with the goggles that we're wearing today. But what we can do, and what we felt now, is that there's a little bit of FOMO going on with Egypt and Jordan, where people are saying, well, why can't we also reap reap the fruits of peace accords. And what's really interesting is that you see it in the numbers. We have 3 times as much trade with Jordan and Egypt since the Abraham Accords than we've had for years. And so I think this is very indicative of the fact that something in the region has actually shifted. So, the next question I get asked is, well, how does your work with Jerusalem and your work with the Abraham Accords, which are 2 different hats, how do they kind of interact? And there is a very, very clear interaction, to me at least, and that is that 40% of my constituents in Jerusalem are Muslim Arabs, 40%. And so we actually have the most diverse city in the country. We're the largest city in the country. We're also the most diverse city in the country. We have 40% Arab population, Muslim population. We have 25% ultra-Orthodox Jews. And so we have 2 very challenging populations. And the reason they're challenging is because both of them are kind of a little bit stuck in a religious and political quagmire, where the leadership doesn't allow them so much to integrate into the workplace, politically, etc. And so I see my job in Jerusalem as working towards bringing these minorities into the prosperity of the startup nation and passing on the message to them that Jerusalem, by its very DNA, is a city of diversity, and diversity actually creates better innovation. And so we're doing a lot of work with embracing these populations into high-tech Arab women, into small, medium-sized businesses with loans and small business training, entrepreneurship training. We believe that women actually are the key to their families for a normalization. How does that interact with the Abraham Accords? And the way that it interacts is that I believe that the Abraham Accords hasn't just brought a regional normalization, it's also brought about a local and a national normalization between Jews and Arabs in our country. We've almost been given permission to like each other again. We've been given permission to be able to call each other cousins again, which is, of course, what we are. And so this is something that has had so many different shifts. And I see this in Jerusalem, particularly with lots of very direct opportunities. For example, the Gulf will become a new source of tourism for Jerusalem because most traditional to religious Muslims want to come and pray in Temple Mount, in Haram al-Sharif, in Al-Aqsa. And I see the Muslim pilgrim as a new type of pilgrimage to Jerusalem that can bring much prosperity also to the local Muslims who are very much involved in the tourism industry already traditionally, and to be able to prosper together from the Abraham Accords. And again, I repeat, women are at the epicenter of this warm peace. We are pushing the boundaries. We are calling each other cousins and sisters, and we are focusing on what unites us rather than what divides us. And that is how we're moving forward towards peace. So I think I'm gonna stop there and open the floor for questions. Or Avi, if you wanna ask any particular question you would like me to answer, then I'd be happy to make this more, more focused on what the audience would love to hear about.
Sure. Well, thank you, Fleur. I have to tell you, it's always, whenever I listen to you and speak to you, it's always amazing the things that you're doing, and we're so much behind you.
Thank you.
I wanted to get your perspective, and maybe I'll start the first question, and then we'll open it up, because you're really in a very special place, and many of us are wondering. Do you think that the Abraham Accords will expand and will expand, sooner rather than later? And we're all, reeling in with the conflict now in Ukraine, and, we need more optimism and hope. And so do you think it's possible at some point soon that Saudi, Oman, Qatar, etc., might consider joining?
That's a great question. And look, I'm an optimist by nature. I think that if a politician's not an optimist, they shouldn't be a politician, because you have to have something to offer. And I do believe that more countries will join. I do believe that, we just have to look at the patterns. So the pattern of Israel and the UAE, let's say 2 to 3 years before the Abraham Accords signing, was this kind of acceleration of under the radar normalization. And what we see now is under the radar normalization with Saudi. Saudi is buying Israeli technology, and they're using countries like Bahrain as the third party country to be able to have this under the radar normalization. So already Saudi understands the advantages of being in business with Israel, which is, of course, the starting step to having normalization and peace with Israel. Of course, Saudi has been declaring very openly that they see resolution of the conflict with the Palestinians as a prerequisite to a full normalization. And I can understand that. The question will have to be whether they're going to take part in trying to encourage the Palestinians to move towards peace, because they've been the one who have been rejecting peace for many, many years now, or whether they will try, will get tired and say, you know what, we're moving forward anyway. But either way, what we see is in Saudi and also in Oman, that you have new modern crown princes with no type of real prejudice towards Jews or Israel, who've both been educated in the West, in the US, in the UK, with older fathers who are more traditional in terms of their views towards Israel. And so we see kind of the older generation and the newer generation, and it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. But I have every confidence that more countries will join. And in fact, if I were betting, I would say watch this space with Indonesia, which is not an Arab country, but it's the largest Muslim country in the world. And Indonesia, half of Indonesia are actually very keen to make peace with Israel. I've already given a few talks to Indonesian leaders, and that's an interesting thing. And also what you'll see with Saudi is more and more under the radar and informal peace building measures rather than formal, which is the canary in the mine and will be, giving us a clue on what's to come in the near future. So yes, I am very optimistic.
Thank you. Okay, let's open it up to some questions on the floor.
I have a comment.
Sorry, who's that? Can you identify?
Wendy Miles.
Wendy. Hi, Avi. It's Wendy Miles.
Hi, Wendy. Go ahead.
Fleur, I'm sure you're familiar with Jerusalem's Herzog Hospital.
Very much so.
Okay, so I just wanted to verify when you said Jerusalem is a highly multicultural city. I am the chairman of the Canadian Friends of Herzog, and I can attest to the fact that 25% of our patients are Arabs, and as well, 25% of our staff are Arabs. So I think that speaks very highly of the city, the hospital, and your comment.
Well, this is the Jerusalem that people don't see. What they don't see is that we live in a shared society. We are villainized by the press constantly with words like apartheid that paint a false, incendiary and slanderous picture of the reality. And the reality is that in Jerusalem, we live together, we work together, we share public spaces, shopping malls, cinemas. In my Zumba class, there are Arab women and ultra-Orthodox women. That is the real Jerusalem. And everything else is a lie that is put there in order to make us look bad. So I'm happy that you, as the chair of Herzog Hospital, which by the way is an incredible hospital, leading in geriatric care in the country. I'm close to the CEO. I've been there a number of times, and I've tried to help the new wing get off the ground and anything that they have needed in the city. And we're very proud that we are the leaders of innovation in geriatric care and rehabilitative care, thanks to Herzog Hospital. So well done, and thank you for your service to Jerusalem through the hospital.
Thank you. And if the hospital can do anything for you, just let us know. So.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wendy. Any other questions?
Avi, may I ask something?
Alan, please go ahead.
Of course, we can barely have a conversation amongst Jews and Israelis which doesn't bring in the Iranian threat. So the question is there anything either through women's groups or, as you say, under the radar that is connecting Israelis with powerful Iranians that might start developing a commonality of interest and a reduction of the threat of Iran to Israel?
Look, what I will say to that is this, Alan, we have no beef with the Iranian people. And let me surprise you and tell you that the Iranian people have no beef with us. We have many, many channels in Farsi for the government. We have many followers on all of these channels. I get messages every day from Iranian women who are subjugated for being women, from Iranian LGBT community who are hanged in the public square for being LGBT. We're talking about a repressive regime that makes its people miserable. Its people would love to be in connection with us. That's not our problem. Our problem are the mullahs and the ayatollahs. It's not the people. And so the only thing we can do through our different governments is press our governments to isolate and keep the boycotts on the regime so that the people can start taking control of their country again and not allow genocidal, homophobic, and misogynistic maniacs run the show. And that's the truth. That's what's going on there. So the people are not our problem and the people love us. I know because I get overtures every single day online from the Iranian people, women, men, everybody. And so do many other Israeli leaders. And we see this through our social media platforms in Farsi that have been created in order to keep a warm line of communication with the Iranian people when, of course, they're allowed the internet, which is something they're not most of the time.
Can I ask a question?
Please go ahead, Leslie.
Okay, I'm going to put my video on because we finished having breakfast. Hi, I'm Leslie Orbach. Very pleased to meet you. I really enjoyed your conversation. One of the things that I'm always struck by is that I don't even know, with social and how the algorithms work, certain accounts are obviously popping up all the time. What accounts, and maybe you can share this with us through AGPI, would you recommend sharing with us that we can then share with our social platforms that basically communicate this information? Because one of the things that I find is that obviously you follow the same people all the time. They have similar messaging all the time. And one of the issues from the Palestinian-Israeli conflict perspective is that even if you promote optimistic, positive information about Israel, that people say you're greenwashing, you're pinkwashing, and you have the few people, Emily in Tel Aviv, you have Joseph Haddad, you have people, but it's the same people. And then they say, well, it's like the one Arab that they're like, and I see that on social. I see a picture of, a Ukrainian Muslim woman arriving in Israel, and I see the same picture on everybody's social platform. So how can we kind of create an environment on social where it's not just like one person or one message, but like multiple legitimate platforms with good information?
That's a really on point question. And this is something that keeps me up at night.
Yeah.
What keeps me up at night is the fact that Israel is not telling its story the way that it's supposed to be telling it. It really is one of the reasons I became a politician, honestly. I was incentivized by becoming a politician because I felt that nobody was really out there telling the story. I try and do that as much as I can from Jerusalem. So I will say there are certain platforms that are fun and different. For example, Stand With Us, I love their stuff. Stand With Us,
Oh, Stand
they
With Us.
do
Yeah,
good stuff. Yeah, Emily and Yosef are good
Yeah.
friends of mine. In fact, I'm invited to their wedding in September. I can't wait. And you've got people like Avi Meyer. You can also follow me. And on LinkedIn and Instagram, you can follow the UAE work that I'm doing with my council, UAE-Israel Business Council. In LinkedIn, we also have the Gulf Israel Women's Forum because it's more of a like professional thing. But on Instagram, you have some other interesting different viewpoints, like Rudy Rockman, who talks about like Israeli, like Jewish indigenous rights here, and he's got a lot of programs with Arabs. Look, my fear is not my fear, I guess. I go from feeling we should do more to feeling they're going to hate us anyway. That really is my kind of my own internal conflict. And so what I would say is, whoever wants to learn the truth can find the truth. And whoever wants to believe lies and just doesn't give us even the benefit of the doubt were people that were probably anti-Semitic to begin with. And the saddest thing for me is not even the anti-Semites. The saddest thing for me is our own Jewish kids who go into college and are given a very impossible choice. Are you pro-human rights or are you pro-Israel? Because you can't be both. And that is what we have to fight. Let's start with our own kids, with our own families. And I say to these kids, with your siblings, with your cousins, when you hear something bad, the first thing you should do is give your own family the benefit of the doubt. Don't forget, we are one family. We are different geography, but we are one people and one family. And so before you believe the haters, just try and dig a little bit. You don't have to dig too much to actually see the truth or to understand that maybe the truth is somewhere in the middle. I'm not saying we're perfect, but we are not what we are portrayed to be. We are a democratic country with human rights, with protection of our minorities, with, thriving civil society, freedom of speech. We criticize ourselves more than anybody could possibly criticize us. And on the other side, you have Hamas, Muslim Brotherhood, Iran, throwing LGBT people off rooftops, subjugating women, curtailing freedom of speech. And whoever doesn't see that just doesn't want to see it. And so, let's put things in proportion and try and just do the best that we can do.
And I think that was very well said, Fleur. And I want to just add to that a couple of points. I think number one is I think that it's also through our action and the fact that you're there in Dubai, and when our organization AGPI is it's one of our mandates to go out there into the world and build those relationships, and those relationships is what's critical, because they build that truth internationally with leaders and with people on the ground and with police and educators and politicians and others. And I think that is, what I've learned, in my experience, is that relationships outweighs everything that happens on social and everything that happens on, and that's what it is. And that's what you're doing, Fleur. You're with the women and with the women's goal. I mean, this is so critical because each person is an influencer, and the circle just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And I think that this is how we can really navigate all those hate mongers. You're right, they're going to stay hateful. And then
the haters will hate.
Yeah,
it's the people on the fence that we need to educate. And it's our kids that we need to make very clear, to make them feel that this is their family, these are your people. And enforce that and say, you may be annoyed with your people. I say to my kids all the time, you guys fight. You fight in the house, but when you go outside, you stick up for each other. And I say the same thing to the young kids that I lecture to. I said, you fight in house, say what you want on our own platforms, in our own country. But when you go outside, you don't side with the enemy. And that's the bottom line.
Exactly, 100%. And and on the human rights side, you're absolutely right that students are forced to choose, and that is sick. It's actually disgusting that because of course, as you said yourself, Israel is a state that practices human rights, and that that choice to me should be fairly easy. But I think, and again, with our institution, is what we're trying to do is take back the narrative of human rights. I think the narrative of human rights has been stolen by Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch and all of those organizations, they don't understand what human rights is, and we need to take that narrative back. And us,
I mean, just to give you an example, on the Amnesty, sorry, I lost you there for a second. On the Amnesty International page, they still have on their front page of their website, the Israel thing. There's 1 million or 2 million Ukrainians that are going to become homeless in the next few weeks. We have thousands murdered, and Amnesty International is still banging the drum of Israel and this bogus apartheid accusation. And CNN, when they're interviewing people in Ukraine, they're obsessed with what's Israel doing? What's any other country doing? You know, and this is the double standards that we have to, on the one hand, fight, and on the other hand, don't take too seriously, because the most important thing is that Israel needs to do what it needs to do to stay safe and secure for ourselves and our people. And that's it.
agreed. Any last questions before we? It's late.
Mary has a question.
No, it's just really an observation. I was listening to Leslie there asking about social media. I live here in Ireland, and I'm not Jewish, but I did my doctorate on childhood under Nazism. And I have a podcast where I interview survivors of mainly, I would say 99.9% of the Shoah, but also survivors of other world genocides. I live in a country there's quite a substantial size of pro-Palestinian and supporters. I suppose I've been at the wrong end of them on a few occasions, but I interview quite a lot of people from Israel also, including Dr. Bernd Vollschläger recently, who is a convert to Judaism. His dad was a decorated commandant in the German, a tank commander, and he converted to Judaism, joined the Israeli Defense Force, and now lives in Florida.
Yep.
So I've interviewed quite a few people from Israel, and I suppose I'm trying through the shows, the podcast called My Story.
Yeah.
And I suppose I'm trying in some small way to try and get the message across of, as I suppose, as Fleur said, you know, what we have in common more than what we have that divides us. And it's not easy because, as I say, we have in our government at the moment, there's a very strong push to boycott Israel. I don't think it will happen. It's gone through several stages and it has passed through several stages, but I don't think it will happen in the end. I've been at protests against boycotting Israel.
And sorry, if
that's all I want to say.
And if I can just jump in, half of AGPI, that's a lot of the work that we're really trying to do is building these relationships with, in this case, Fleur, and just trying to get that message of collaboration together, especially when it comes and you know, as an educator, I love that you started right off the bat, that we can no longer call this the Israeli-Arab conflict. And that's that narrative that Avi talks about. And I know, Avi, you want to jump in here. That becomes so key is that changing and reclaiming our narrative. That really begins the collaboration, but the movement towards authentic and sustainable peace.
Yes. So first of all, Mary, thank you for the work that you're doing. I think it's even more significant with somebody who's not Jewish pushes forward with research and when telling the story of the Holocaust. And Neil, absolutely, you know, we have to keep educating people and making them understand that, you know, that especially, you know, Jews and Muslims, we come from the same, you know, father, a grandfather. And so this is what the Abraham Accords has really done. Calling it the Abraham Accords is probably the best bit of branding that's ever been done. And Avi, well done for co-opting that also for your Global Peace Institute initiative. And I think that really is the message. Mary, I have been to Ireland, speaking on behalf of Israel in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And I know it's not easy. And what's the saddest thing of all is that I was in Dublin, but I've also been in Belfast. And in Belfast, it's very clear that the Catholics have taken on the Palestinian narrative and the Protestants have taken on the Israeli narrative. And I just find it fascinating in a sad way, the way that these two groups have co-opted this conflict to their own conflict. And it's kind of very sad. And I just hope one day there'll be no conflict, not there and not here.
Well, it is quite right. You are quite right. The Protestants in the north I'm a Roman Catholic, and that makes it even harder when you're in the south, because I live in the south, because you have people who they associate what's going on in Israel and Palestine with what happened between the British and the Irish during the famine. So that's how they aligned. Some have aligned themselves.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, what they don't understand that we also were under a British mandate and we got independence the same way Ireland did, but somehow it's the other side that gets co-opted.
That's a really good point. Well, thank you. I'm going to, before I thank Fleur and we all sign off, I just want to remind the group, because we were talking about campus, and in fact, Genevieve just reminded me to remind you that we have a session on how to speak to your kids before they go to university on anti-Semitism on campus. And so we just released a report on anti-Semitism across Canada on university campuses. We'll be reviewing that report and then giving some points about how it is to engage your kids before they go to university on what they
Avi, what the best thing that people can do before they go to university is just come to Israel. Have a great summer, have fun, and realize what a great country it is.
Exactly.
And that we're not racist, and that we're a great free country. Do that with the kids, believe me, better than the lecture.
Yeah, if we can get them to Israel, then we're all for it any day of the week, 100%. So that event is on March 23rd, and you can link to it via our website. So once again, Fleur, thank you. I've taken down a lot of notes. You are spectacular as always. I'm sure the group here could spend probably another 3 hours with you, but I know it's getting late in the evening. And we want to thank you very much for being with us, for allowing us to celebrate, International Women's Day, and really, what better way than to meet with you and to understand the accomplishments that women leaders are having. It's just amazing. So thank you so much. I want to thank
you all.
Our co-chairs, also Candace and Genevieve, for hosting us today, and for my colleague Neil Orlowski. Thank you so much to everybody for being with us. We appreciate the support, and we look forward to seeing you again very soon.
Thank you all.
Okay, thank you. Have a nice day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.